My name's Serina Maiko, charmed, and welcome to what you've all been waiting for, a guide to the Omegaverse. Today, I will be taking you through everything that there is to know for complete beginners. This is technically educational, okay? This is a concept overview, so we are all going to be very mature, calm, and collected, right? We're gonna be on our best behavior today, so Daddy YouTube doesn't get me. Maybe I'll put my coat back on just in case. So without further ado, let's get into the Omegaverse. As you can see, we have a lot of topics to cover. Overview. Now, I know what you guys are going to say. I don't care if you don't like Low Tide and Twilight or Love Remedy. I do care if you dislike Love Shuttle, because who the f dislikes Love Shuttle? So, what is the Omegaverse? The Omegaverse is an alternative universe and genre of fiction, very loosely, based around the social hierarchy of wolves. In this universe, people are split into three main classifications: Alpha, Beta, and Omega. These classifications, aka second genders, have alternative anatomy, making it possible for male Omegas to get pregnant and for female Alphas to impregnate others, as well as plenty of other fun power-ups, as I like to call them. However much you're thinking there is to the Omegaverse, there is so much more. One more time, I will give you the disclaimer that there are going to be scientific diagrams in later slides showing you guys how the inner workings of the reproductive anatomy works in this universe. But the main thing I really wanted to talk about is that, similar to the concept of vampires, the Omegaverse has core traits that remain the same across all stories, but allows authors to reinterpret/expand on the lore with unique variations depending on their world building. Like vampires or werewolves or elves or whatever other mythical creature, it really is more so about capturing the general overarching story rather than having like strict rules for each one. It really is just up to the author, and so I wanted to be transparent about that, for if I say anything, you understand why it may differ from the stories that you have read before or what you have known from before. This is why you may see some concepts that are different or inconsistent between stories. The most effective way to learn about the Omegaverse is to read/consume more media involving the topic. Let's move on to, oh no, history. I want to preface this by saying, I'm sorry that the origin of most things when it comes to fandom, I won't even say most, but you'd be surprised how many fandom things originated from Supernatural. There was this fandom called the Super Hulaks, and they were kind of the root of all evil, but you know what? They birthed a lot of concepts. It's their culture, you know? We can find traces of Omegaverse ideology in fiction as early as like the mid to late 1900s. I couldn't get a straight answer, but the most recognized origin dates back to a Jensen X Jared kink prompt. I didn't really bother reading this entire thing, so it could be saying the most vile stuff known to man, but this does make Jensen Ackles the world's first recognized Omega in fiction. So let's get into the more meat and potatoes of this presentation. Social hierarchy. While betas often make up the majority of the population, the order of power is as follows. So you have the alphas at the top. They hold the highest position in society, often coming from privileged families and pursuing careers of power. So they're going to be your rich CEOs, they're going to be your gang leaders, they're going to be your boss's boss type guy. Betas are generally seen as the common folk, as they do follow the reproductive system as the natural world. Then you have Omegas, which are always ranked at the bottom, making them the most oppressed classification. Their second gender has the largest effect on their daily life, as they are often preyed upon and belittled by others. They have a harder time finding jobs or pursuing other opportunities due to this discrimination. For example, Love is an Illusion, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. There was a scene where Haesung was struggling to find a job because a lot of jobs would just straight up have a sign that say no Omegas allowed. They would have to lie and say, oh, I'm a beta. Kiss Me If You Can is a manga about an Omega who pretends to be a beta so that he can work as a personal bodyguard. Obviously, if they knew he was an Omega, they wouldn't really take him seriously or trust in his strength to protect their alpha like target guy that they're watching. It's like he's like an actor or something. I don't know. I'm not caught up. Now, these are the slides where we're going to be going into the reproductive system. So if you are uncomfortable with seeing diagrams of the reproductive system, feel free to close your eyes, or if you want to just have the stream open like audio only, you do whatever you have to do. I do not want to make anyone uncomfortable. So we are all going to be very mature and not get me demonetized, correct? Tell me you understand. Go on. nod your heads, nod your little heads, SARMY. Reproductive system of an alpha. Alphas are generally described as protective, possessive, and dominant. Both male and female alphas have the ability to impregnate female betas and all omegas. Female alphas cannot get pregnant, with the exception of enigmas, which I will be talking about a little bit later. In most stories, or like Yuri Omegaverse, there is Yuri Omegaverse, by the way. Female alphas have like a retractable penis, although sometimes they do kind of operate with like the Futanari anatomy. And if you're wondering, oh, well, if they both have penises, what makes one a girl and what makes them one not? Female alphas still have boobs. They still have feminine features and like they present as female. It's just like I said, it's a secondary gender. So it's more so based around their deeper anatomy and not so much their gender expression, if that makes sense. And then we get into betas, which as I said before, follows the same reproductive system as the natural world. In most stories, betas do not have strong pheromones, if any. So this is another one of those things, especially because people just don't write about betas as often. It can kind of differ from story to story. Sometimes they can smell alpha and omega pheromones, other times they can't smell it. It really just kind of depends on the story. In most stories, betas cannot feel or smell pheromones from alphas or omegas, nor do they experience heat or ret cycles. So even though the pheromone thing is kind of a could or couldn't, the thing that is almost always consistent, like more than 90% consistent, is the fact that betas do not experience heat or ret cycles. They don't have to worry as much about like their second gender oppression, because even though people are like, oh, alphas are the best, they kind of look at betas as like, I guess you're okay. They're not really looking down on you as a beta unless it's another alpha or if you're in a relationship with an omega. So the next slide, obviously we have omega anatomy. You may have noticed that for the omega male reproductive system, their penis is just genetically smaller. That is a very consistent thing as like one of the like quote unquote like traits of what makes an omega. This is a question I see asked a lot. How do omega men give birth? At least for the Omegaverse, it is almost always a butt baby or C-section. When I say butt baby, I do not mean that they are pooping the baby out of their rectum. It kind of works like a cloaca on the inside. You can see right here, they've got the cloacal flap. Basically what happens is when the omega man is either aroused or in heat or during intercourse or during childbirth or any other reason that they need to access their birth canal, this little flap will flip open, which then closes off access to the rectal cavity. So that is how that is separated. They cannot both be open at the same time. Omegas are generally described as gentle, nurturing, and submissive. I do want to say one more disclaimer that when I say they're generally described as, just like how gender expression and sex works like in the natural world, just because they're an omega does not mean that they will always be gentle, nurturing, and or submissive. There are definitely dominant omegas and there are definitely submissive alphas. Everybody is different. It's just your second gender classification and the common traits of those, but not necessarily a hard lock on what an omega or an alpha is supposed to be. And again, that's why I think it's so interesting and so complex, because it kind of like doubles the concept of like misogyny and homophobia, like all of those things. Like it really just kind of takes it to the next level. Lastly, for the reproductive system, yes, omega men can lactate. This is not consistent in all stories. I've definitely read stories where the omega, like a male omega was pregnant and gave birth, but he couldn't lactate, so they had to only use formula. And then I've read other stories where he was lactating, not even because he was pregnant, but just because he was having like a hormonal imbalance. And so the alpha had unimportant. When an omega man ejaculates, their semen does not contain sperm, so they cannot impregnate others. Alpha women don't have wombs, so they cannot get pregnant. This is where things get a little confusing. Again, it's fiction, all right? In terms of the deeper inner works of anatomy with how alpha women can get impregnated, or just alphas in general, actually. Alpha men can also be impregnated by an enigma, which I had mentioned this before. An enigma is basically just a very tiny percent of the population. It's so small that people don't even believe they exist, and in most stories they don't. But in the ones that they do, that can get an alpha pregnant. I'm gonna be so honest, you kind of just have to use your imagination a bit there to understand how exactly that works. Basically, with the power of love, they can change their anatomy to be more compatible with their reproductive needs. Yeah, that's pretty much the only purpose of an enigma, by the way. Moving on to the glossary. Here is where we get to kind of touch a little bit on all of the more about like like what life is like in the Omegaverse for like alphas, betas, omegas. Heat is when an omega is at their most aroused and fertile state. This happens periodically, but can also be induced. What I mean by that is if an omega is like smelling the pheromones of an alpha in rut or vice versa, or there's like a dominant alpha, or just like for whatever reason, they just get really, really aroused, they can then be induced to go into heat even if it is not their time of the cycle, which, as you can imagine, is very annoying. There's also for like recessive omegas or for like newly expressed omegas, they can have very irregular heat cycles, so they don't always know when they're going to go into heat. It's a very common trope that omegas in the Omegaverse are supposed to track their heat cycles so that they can kind of stay on top of that, because usually you're supposed to start taking your suppressants before the heat cycle actually starts, because if you start taking them when it starts, it's kind of too late, you know? It's kind of like a 40% effective type thing. There's a little bit of that inequality there as well, because it is very uncommon for alphas to track their rut cycles. They can go into rut, which as you can see here, rut is basically the same thing for an alpha that it is for an omega. It's when they're at their most aroused and fertile state. So if an alpha is around an omega that's in heat, their pheromones can then trigger their heat, or ruts, more commonly known. I bring up the inequality a little bit because, again, even though omegas will get a lot of shit and discrimination and scrutiny and disrespect for not knowing when their heat cycle is going to show up, even though in terms of like omega healthcare and suppressants is so much more expensive for omegas, but whatever, we're not even gonna get into it. It's kind of like in, oh, well, what were you wearing situation in terms of how people expect omegas to mandate their bodily functions and everything, but then never really putting the blame on alphas when those unfortunate scenarios happen. Just a little bit more of that social hierarchy that I had mentioned. Even though both alphas and omegas experience pretty much a lot of the same things, alphas are just at the top of society. You're probably wondering, how does one give birth to a baby through their booty hole, or the uke hole as I like to call it? Because you know, when women give birth, or when women have intercourse, like they're self-lubricating, their inner walls or whatever secretes the fluid to reduce friction, which makes intercourse and childbirth and everything a lot smoother. Since omega men don't have vaginas, they have a natural lubricant that is produced during heat or just general arousal called slick, which is used to reduce the friction during intercourse and childbirth, etc. On to knots. It's actually a very interesting thing. A knot is a swelling at the base of an alpha's penis that occurs during intercourse as they approach climax. It knots the penis inside, ensuring a higher chance of pregnancy. This is a natural thing that happens. For the most part, is out of their control, so a lot of times alphas just kind of have to like keep themselves from getting too excited. I will say, if you're reading Love is an Illusion, I don't know if this is an art error or if it's just different in this story, but in Love is an Illusion, it makes it look like the tip is swelling, which I'm gonna be honest is a bit scary. So don't be too afraid, but not impossible. It basically just kind of like, oh, they can't pull out until they come. It's more likely to happen close to their rut, or just like if there's a lot of pheromones, or again, if they just get overexcited. It's usually very rude. It goes against proper sex etiquette to not inside anybody, honestly, without their prior consent or knowledge. So in terms of how this works into society, while there are those full of themselves alphas that are just like, well, I don't care, I can't control it, I'll knot you if I want, it is rude and wrong to do so without establishing a prior understanding of consent. So don't go knotting any omegas just because you can. This next term you guys have definitely heard. It's called empreg, and that is when a cisgender man becomes pregnant. But the next one, fempreg, is when a cisgender woman impregnates another person. That is why we have the term fempreg, because just like how men can be impregnated, women can impregnate others. Something you'll definitely see more so in written Omegaverse is the term catching, and that is literally just when an omega like successfully conceives a baby. And then lastly, we have nesting, which I think is a very cute, wholesome term. It basically means to create a safe, private space, often during pregnancy or heat, using soft, comfortable items with the scent of comfort and or their partner. It's definitely more common for omegas that are pregnant in their like mid to later stages of pregnancy, but alphas can and do nest as well. And a lot of times they don't even realize they're doing it, because omegas are usually, you know, like I said, like society kind of expects omegas to be the more nurturing one, like the like quote unquote like motherly one. It really ties back into, again, we'll talk about pheromones in a second, but pheromones are really, really important for alphas and omegas, not just in terms of like going into heat or for like seducing people, but also during pregnancy. You'll notice that in a lot of stories, when an omega is pregnant, it is very imperative that they have like a constant flow and ingestion of their alpha's pheromones to kind of keep their hormones and emotions and everything steady. Alphas and omegas are uncontrollably attracted to each other due to the pheromones they emit through their glands. I want to note that while it says uncontrollably attracted, just because your biology is trying to force you into a box or society is trying to tell you who you are doesn't necessarily mean that this is how alpha, betas, and omegas always act. We do not want to be discriminatory, especially towards omegas. They definitely get the worst in terms of like stereotypes and assumptions because, like I said before, even though alphas have the same problems of going into ruts and then like having like their pheromones leak out and stuff like that, or even getting like taken advantage of, society just holds them to a different standard. If an alpha messes up, it's, oh, he can't help it. He's just an alpha. Alphas will be alphas, you know? But if an omega messes up, then it's, oh my God, that slut, they should have known better. That's what I mean when I talk about the social hierarchy and injustice within the Omegaverse. And then another really, really interesting thing, once again, is talking about that intersectionality between being like an omega man versus like a beta female, because even though there is that second gender oppression, there is still very much regular gender oppression and like misogyny and just like the world being like, oh, but she's a woman. She may be an alpha, but she's a woman. Stuff like that. It literally just kind of adds like a second layer of oppression and bullshit to get on people for and stereotype people for. So that is, again, where I think it's very interesting. Something that you guys may not know that much about: dominant versus recessive traits in alphas and omegas. Now, when you hear the term dominant alpha or submissive omega, you probably think, oh, that's just the role that they play in the bedroom. And sometimes when it is in that context, yes, you can have a dominant omega that's not necessarily genetically dominant, but just takes the lead in the bedroom and vice versa. However, what I'm referring to is more so in how it balances out their hormones and their genes and everything like that. Dominant alphas have stronger pheromones, meaning that if they were to go toe to toe with a regular alpha and like try to use their pheromones as like an intimidation tactic, the dominant alpha's pheromones are going to be stronger, which will then trigger a chemical reaction in anyone else's brains, actually, which forces them to submit. Like a size contest almost. If they're just two like standard typical alphas in an argument, they're just like, they'll use their pheromones to kind of like try to intimidate other people. And then on the opposite side, we have dominant omegas, which have stronger pheromones, but also stronger fertility. Now that I have taught you about dominant and recessive traits in alphas and omegas, we have a activity. Going across the top, I've got the four classifications. You've got dominant alpha, recessive alpha, dominant omega, and recessive omega. And you guys are going to rearrange them in the correct order because all of these are all scrambled right now. If you've read the stories, by the way, do not answer. I want to see what people who have not read the stories will guess. Let's start with Lee Cho-won. Do we think that Lee Cho-won is a dominant alpha, a recessive alpha, a dominant omega, or a recessive omega? Okay, I'm seeing more dominant omega. Dun, 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 dun. And locked in. We are moving. That's the wrong thing. Oopsies. You guys said dominant omega. All right, next one. Seo Jinha. Do we think that Seo Jinha is a dominant alpha, a recessive alpha, or a recessive omega? Recessive alpha, recessive alpha, recessive alpha. Oh, a lot of people are saying recessive alpha. All right, recessive alpha. So then that leaves us with Kim Do-hyun. Do we think that Kim Do-hyun is a dominant alpha or a recessive omega? Seen a lot of recessive omegas. One more answer. All right, recessive omega it is, which would make Woo Ju-hyuk our dominant alpha. Now, it is time to grade your work. Let me go ahead and get you guys a little check mark for all of the ones you got right. Lee Cho-won is a dominant omega. Everything else is wrong. Woo Ju-hyuk is a recessive alpha. Seo Jinha is actually our recessive omega. Kim Do-hyun is our dominant alpha from Alpha Trauma on Tapas. I was talking about this a little bit before for a romance not romantic. That is where this guy is from. Seo Jinha, this guy right here, was originally a beta from his first manifestation and classification, who then remanifested as a recessive omega due to stress, overwork, lack of sleep, too much drinking, and just like pretty much just not really taking care of his body. That's why he's recessive omega. Like I said, he's less likely to get pregnant. I don't think he's even fertile at all, actually. Moving on. marking. Marking, also known as bonding, imprinting, mating, claiming, whatever you want to call it. Basically, this is just how an alpha lays their claim on a person, or an omega can also mark an alpha. In some stories, this is just a like visually aesthetic thing. In other stories, it has a much deeper chemical reaction. So right here, I have, what was this? Sweet, no, sugar, I think, where you can see he's telling him, he's like, oh, I imprinted on you. Sorry, this is actually a spoiler. Just talking to him about how he imprinted on him, and that's why like he will literally die if they are separated for too long. It's the same with Love is an Illusion, where they accidentally bond. I'm sorry. Listen, in my defense, it's not that good. The art style changes after season 2. It's not worth it. There's other stories. There's better stories. It's kind of like a forever bond that you're forming with another person. And you can see there's that little graphic here that says no bonding before marriage. There's also stories like in December where an alpha will try to like force a bond over an omega that they get particularly possessive over, because that is another common trait of alphas, especially those that are on the more dominant side. I would say this is significantly more invasive and rude to do to somebody without their prior consent, because this is literally marking somebody for life. You are claiming them for life. They cannot leave you. If you were to bond with someone after marriage and then divorce, you would not be able to leave that person because your body would be dependent on their pheromones and vice versa. You will die without each other. It is very intense. It is very, very serious. And it is a very fucked up thing to do to somebody. I'm looking at you, all you dominant alphas out there that don't have a care in the world. It is a very fucked up thing to do to somebody without really, really properly talking about it first. It's usually in the form of a bite. Sometimes the bite leaves like a permanent scar so that people can see that they're bonded or marked. Other times it just kind of fades away like any other wound. It's actually advised for omegas that have unstable pheromones to consider bonding, because once you're bonded to someone, then you don't really have to like worry about going into heat as frequently, because your body is thinking, okay, we've kind of secured the bag. We don't need to trigger our heat. We don't need to have super strong pheromones to bring in an alpha, because we already have one. A power system ripe for abuse. Exactly. It's terrible. And this is why I will be having my anti-alpha. Let me stop. Next thing, pheromones. I was gonna have a little diagram to talk about where the scent glands are for pheromones, but it's pretty similar. Obviously, you sweat from kind of like your neck and your underarms, like in your like more like crevices and stuff like that. That is where they produce their scent. They have scent glands. Sometimes you can feel them and they're very sensitive if some people will like bite or nibble on them. Other times they're literally just there to give off the scent. Emotional influence. This is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about how you can kind of get a read for what they're feeling based off of their pheromones. So you can smell someone's pheromones and think, oh my God, someone just went into heat. Or if you see two alphas in an argument, you could smell their pheromones and you're like, oh, this is really uncomfortable. The air just got all heavy now. Pheromones are not just for reproductive purposes. There's also something called a pheromone shower, which is basically when an alpha just douses somebody in their pheromones. It doesn't have to be an omega, because if any of you guys have ever read Honey Trouble, they get in a whole argument about that, because the main character in Honey Trouble is actually a beta, which I won't spoil again. In Honey Trouble, there is a part where they get in an argument because the alpha gives him a pheromone shower, and because he's a beta, he can't even smell it. So he has no idea that he smells like a pheromone shower, and everyone around him is just like, oh wow, how tacky, like announce to the whole world that you just finished having sex with someone. Oh my gosh, your partner must be so possessive, so dominant, so clingy. That is basically how pheromone showers work. Lastly, we have pheromone perfume, which I'll actually talk a little bit more when we start talking about suppressants. So I'm gonna skip over that for now and jump to suppressants. Actually, as you can see from this image over here, suppressants can come in many different methods of ingestion. So you can take them orally, you can take them like with like an actual like needle injection. You can see there's pills, there's dissolvables, you can put in like water and stuff like that. Basically, when it comes to heat and rut suppressants, as I said before, these are medications that you typically want to be taking a few days leading up to your heat or rut to kind of numb the feeling. Because I will say, even though it sounds fun to be super horny and sensitive, a lot of heats are portrayed to be very, very painful. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like a literal physical heat that you feel burning up inside of you, and it's like your blood, your veins are boiling, your skin is on fire, you're feeling like hormonally congested and just like you're out of control, you start blacking out, you can get dizzy, get dehydrated. Like a lot of heat symptoms, aside from the arousal, are described as something similar to flu symptoms. Not a fun time. And again, especially when Omegas go into heat, this is a very vulnerable time for them, not just because it hurts, but because we have these asshole alphas that'll try to take advantage of them. We also have scent blocking perfume, which if you see here in the Love is an Illusion panel, there's a little alpha symbol on what is very clearly an Omega's perfume bottle. Basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a perfume that's supposed to block your pheromones. So if you have an Omega that's pretending to be a beta and they look very clearly like an Omega, but they say they're a beta, and then you smell their Omega pheromones, kind of outs them, and vice versa. Almost last but not least, we have our reproductive compatibilities. Yeah, Enigma can dominate every gender, alphas included, can impregnate every gender, alphas included, is believed to be a myth because of their rarity, the ultimate gender, the super gender, if you will. And then Omegas, as you can see down there, it says male Omega is more difficult to get pregnant than a female Omega. That is in any context, really. If you're a recessive male Omega, you are like the bottom of society. You can see over there, I've got a little chart. Alphas are most compatible with Omegas, regardless of whether they're male or female. Everything below that, alpha male with a beta female is more compatible than a beta male with a beta female. I don't even think a beta male can, yeah, beta males can't get Omega males pregnant. I know it is a little confusing, but it has to do with their pheromones as well. Last but not least, we have examples of some stories that I would recommend specifically to learn about the Omegaverse. I cannot promise you that these stories are good, except December. December's a work of art. You know what's funny? Actually, I think December explains the Omegaverse probably the least out of all of them. But I don't care. I'm biased, and this is my presentation, so December is going to be there in the examples. I do think Love is an Illusion is a very good starter Omegaverse, especially if you don't know anything about it and you just want to learn about it and like through a story. Do I think they're a good couple? No, Dojin sucks. Husband from hell. Literally everything that is wrong with alphas these days. But oh my god, I hate this man. Don't even get me started on Love is an Illusion Superstar. Because why are you still talking to his mother? December is actually about a recessive Omega. You'll see a lot more about how recessive male Omegas are treated. In December, it's not just that they're less fertile. If you're a recessive Omega, you cannot get pregnant. Society treats you like you're essentially broken, and or your only purpose is to have sex with. Definitely my favorite on here out of the lineup. Although romance, not romantic, I did really like this one. I think it was really fun. I love enemies to lovers so freaking much. And then we have the Origin of Species, which honestly, I haven't finished. I haven't finished either of these, but again, at the very beginning, it does just have like a long blurb of text explaining the Omegaverse. So if you want more so that, we've got the Origin of Species and how to snag an alpha. And I believe that is the end. I forgot. I forgot this was. Listen! Don't stare at me! I definitely had this to skip this slide, but whatever. There's literally no information on this slide. It's just an appreciation post for Kim Woo-hyun. This is the Omega from Low Tide and Twilight. And I'm gonna say it again. I don't care if you don't like Low Tide and Twilight. I don't care. I don't even care if you don't like Taeju. You can hate him all you want. But Kim Woo-hyun is my Omega. I will curse your bloodline. Your lineage ends with you. Do not say anything bad. This is our generational Omega. No one tops him except his husband. You can say whatever you want about Low Tide and Twilight. I don't care. But you cannot say anything bad about Kim Woo-hyun. He is doing his best. He has always been doing his best. He is a strong, independent, amazing Omega. Everything that Omegas stand for. I love him so much. He really goes against the stereotypes of what Omegas are supposed to be like. He never backs down. This is my baby. This is my Shayla right here. I don't care if he's 27 or 28 actually. This is my baby. That is the actual end of the slideshow, I think. Yes, okay. Thank you guys for for coming today to listen to me yap about the Omegaverse. I'm gonna just keep Uihyun on the screen while we do questions. Question, how does Sari's scent smell like? All right, can an Enigma impregnate an Enigma? I mean, Enigmas can impregnate anything. Is the dom recessive thing a hard line or is it a scale? Like, can a dominant alpha overpower another dominant alpha or do they just equal out? It's definitely more like a scale. If you have like two dominant alphas, everybody else would just be uncomfortable, but it wouldn't be impossible for one to dominate the other. Think of it like a score multiplier, you know? Recessive traits would have like a negative score multiplier, and then dominant traits would have a positive score multiplier. From there, it really just comes down to how high or low your score multiplier is. My review of the presentation, MPreg out of 10. Yay! Thank you! This was fun. Yay! Thank you! I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. It's been an honor spending time with you today, but unfortunately, this fish has to go rehydrate, so it's time I bid you adieu. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more from me, not as sashimi, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye-bye!